Hey everybody, it's time to talk affirmative action. A big court ruling came out and a lot of people pretty mad, including a professor named Erwin Chemerinsky. Now, people have been saying that this is at Berkeley, that he's a Berkeley professor, but he was the dean of, I believe, the law school at UC Irvine. So I'm not sure where this video is taken, but he is going to astound us with this real sophisticated, complex, a four-dimensional chess move to get around the affirmative action ruling. Listen in.
What if the college or university doesn't tell anybody, doesn't make any public statements? I'll give you an example.
We don't need an example because what you just told us is so lame. This is not exactly a wild strategy. We're going to break the law, but don't tell anybody. So in other words, what we're going to do is discriminate, but we won't say anything that makes it look like we're discriminating. Gee, that's really profound. Amazing. They had to have a professor come up with this one.
Our law school, but if ever I'm deposed, I'm going to deny I said this to you.
Oh, he's going to deny he ever said this if anybody brings it up. Dude, okay, you teach at a law school, you should know that people video record nowadays. And the fact is that somebody being in your class is video recording it is pretty high. I mean, those chances are really high. And I almost guarantee you that he is exactly the kind of professor that said, you are not allowed to video record me teaching my classes. And I taught college, and I didn't care if students video recorded. I did tell them if I do something, like slipped and fell, if they would appreciate, not putting that online. And my students would not have done that. But I know what you're thinking. Oh, no, they would have. No, they wouldn't. I know my students pretty damn well. Okay. Now, his students would have. Okay. Because they probably don't respect him at all. But at any rate, it's amazing that he really thought that this was going to be said and no one was ever going to know about it.
When we do faculty hiring, we're quite conscious that diversity is important to us. And we say diversity is important, it's fine to say that. But I'm very careful when we have a faculty appointments committee meeting. Anytime somebody says, we should really prefer this candidate or this candidate because this person would add diversity, don't say that. You can think it, you can vote it, but our discussions are not privileged, so don't ever articulate that that's what you're doing.
I mean, the man's a genius. Who would have ever thought of this strategy? Discriminate, but don't tell anybody there that you are actually discriminating. Hey, how would you like to have been turned down for a job with UC Irvine and listening to this shit? He's basically blatantly telling the class that he breaks the law, but he has this really clever way of getting away with it.
That works more easily with regard to faculty hiring. With regard to student admissions, it becomes more difficult because of statistical measure.
Oh, those darn statistics keep us from breaking the law. If only we didn't have those statistics. Oh yeah, this is, I'm glad he did it because he's telling you what they do behind closed doors when it comes to admitting students. They absolutely break the law and they will continue to do so. Now, as he said, there's going to be some limitations now because if they do too much of it, it's going to be borne out by the statistics. So you're not going to see the black high school student get into all like 8 Ivy League schools. I don't know how many there are, but there's probably about 8. You're not going to see that anymore because that's going to be really blatant. No high school kid is going to be able to get into all of the Ivy League schools, based on merit. It's not possible. They're too selective for that. You might get into 3 or 4. That's possible. All 8? Nope. Chances 1 in a cajillion. And yet every year there's always a student who does it, and they're always black. Okay. Now, I don't want to weigh in on the affirmative action as yes or no or whatever, but I'm telling you that They are going to try to continue doing that, but they're going to be limited by it because those kind of stories are not going to sit well with the public, okay? Now, when it comes to faculty hiring, he's telling you, we just discriminate like hell, we break the law, and we don't care. As long as you don't tell anybody anything about what you're doing, it's okay. This is a constitutional law professor. I thought that a law professor was supposed to uphold the law, but evidently that's not the case. Okay, now, I will say this about Ervin Chemerinsky. I mean, he's not stupid, okay? He's I would suggest, considered to be, got a fly running around here. There's I know I complained about the fly in the first video, so you might be thinking, geez, what kind of dump does Johnny Walker Dredd live in? Well, whatever, that's beside the point. But at any rate, he is a esteemed scholar. He knows his stuff. I mean, his IQ is probably pretty high. He's a hard leftist. By the way, this guy is also on the reparations task force for the state of California. So, yeah, okay. But he's no fool. For the fool, we have to bring in Rashad Richey. So we're going to go from, a criminal but smart dude to Rashad. Right? So this is going to be, a shock. But okay, we're going to now get a version of the affirmative action ruling from a real nitwit.
The United States Supreme Court decides to eliminate affirmative action inside of higher education. This is just the beginning. Let's put up the picture full mass. The individuals who were in charge of this decision. The Supreme Court now says that colleges and universities can no longer take race into consideration as a specific basis for granting admission. A landmark decision overturning long-standing precedent that has benefited Black and Latino students in higher education.
At the expense of others.
Affirmative action, ladies and gentlemen, has also benefited white women. I will get into that momentarily. Let's put up how the vote broke down. SCOTUS rules against affirmative action in college admissions. You have your majority opinion and your dissent. Majority opinion and the dissent.
Well, I'm glad he told us that. I would never have guessed that in a decision like the Supreme Court makes, that there's going to be a majority decision and a dissenting decision. That's good to know.
The dissent makes way more sense than the majority opinion.
Oh, well, hell, let's just go home then. I mean, what can you say beyond that?
Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion for the conservative majority, saying the Harvard and University of North Carolina admissions programs violated the Equal Protection Clause because they failed to offer measurable objectives to justify the use of race. He said the programs involved racial stereotyping and had no specific endpoint.
Wow, okay, that's an interesting take. Rashad is now going to dissect this, tell us what this all means, give us his view on this. Yeah, screw you, you ain't gonna get that.
The majority opinion claims that the court was not expressly overturning prior cases authorizing race-based affirmative action, and suggested that how race was affected, has affected an applicant's life can still be part of how their application is considered.
I wonder what that means. So their life can be a part, but they can't be chosen on base of race? That sounds a little bit maybe contradictory. I wonder if Rashad is going to come in and tell us about this contradiction. Screw you. You ain't going to get that.
But even if the court did not formally end race-based affirmative action in higher education, its analysis will make it practically impossible for colleges and universities to take race into account, as the 3 Democratic appointees stressed in their dissent.
And I'm telling you that most of the left are saying, no, we're going to still do it. We're not going to let this stop us. There are other ways of getting these students into these Ivy League schools. Okay? So give me a break. They don't even believe that. They know fully well that they're just going to break the law.
Let me give you the statement from Justice Clarence Thomas, who has benefited from affirmative action his damn self.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes a person can benefit from something and later realize I shouldn't have, and then vote against it. It happens.
In a lengthy concurrence, which isn't even necessary, Justice Clarence Thomas, the second Black person to join the Supreme Court, spoke in unusually personal terms as he criticized the use of affirmative action by colleges and universities, which he described as rudderless, race-based preferences designed to ensure a particular racial mix in their entering classes.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I wonder if Rashad Richey is going to now dissect that and show us why his comments there are no good. I mean, he's going to give us this analysis, right? Screw you, you're not going to get that.
Let's go to statements for Justice Jackson. In her own dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson accused the conservative majority of having a let them eat cake obliviousness in how the court's affirmative action ruling announced color blindness for all by legal fiat. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. She said, joined by the court's 2 other liberals, Justice Jackson wrote that the majority had detached itself from this country's actual past and present experience. Now,
keep in mind that she's not really making a legal argument here. It's all emotion, right? The majority had detached itself from this country's actual past and present experiences. That's not a legal argument.
Understand, the majority opinion is the opinion of those who will say to anyone wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, all lives matter. Where
did that come from? Oh, geez. And he knows this how.
But see, if all lives matter, we would not need a campaign that said Black Lives Matter. You see, there's a correction required in the context of understanding the now. The court has provided that routinely. Sometimes they have failed, other times they have offered to remedy. There's more. No one benefits from ignorance, she added. A footnote in her dissent, when after the majority concurrence by Justice Clarence Thomas, the only other Black justice on the court, his opinion also demonstrates an obsession with race consciousness that far outstrips my or UNC's holistic understanding that race can be a factor that affects applicants' unique life experiences, Jackson added, saying that his concurrence ignites many more straw men to list or fully extinguish here.
Well, my comment would be that, let's go back to her statement. His obsession with race consciousness far outstrips my or UNC's holistic understanding that race can be a factor that affects applicants' unique life experiences. But why does that allow a person to get into a college above somebody else. Well, that's a good argument to undertake, right? You think Rashad Richey is going to do that? No. And there's a reason why. He doesn't understand what they're saying here. He's just reading it. He doesn't have any clue as to what their arguments are about.
The takeaway is that those who demand that no one think about race, a classic pink elephant paradox, refuse to see, much less solve for, the elephant in the room, the race-linked disparities that continue to impede achievement of our great nation's full potential.
Okay, fine, but why is that a constitutional argument? I mean, you're saying that these policies will help certain people, but that doesn't make them constitutional. Okay, constitutional implies going through the Constitution and case law and seeing if the actual elements of the affirmative action policies line up. And maybe they do, maybe they don't, but that's the argument that you have to undertake. Not this boo-hoo-hoo where we used to benefit, we won't benefit now from it, so therefore the Supreme Court ruling is wrong. The Supreme Court is not supposed to take into account whether something is beneficial or not, according to a certain group of people. It's designed to make sure that our laws are following the Constitution. Now, I understand that there are some, exceptions on that. I'm not saying it's that strict. However, what she is making here is not a constitutional argument.
The footnote said, in her broader dissent, Justice Jackson said that the argument made by the challengers that affirmative action programs are unfair, quote, blinks both history and reality in ways too numerous to count. Conservative groups' efforts in overturning affirmative action challengers in the case targeted Harvard and the University of North Carolina, arguing that their programs violate equal protection principles, dashed the promise of a colorblind society, and discriminated against Asian Americans. They were targeted, I'm saying this personally, they were targeted by way of strategy. This is why they used this strategy. They asked the court to overturn precedent and insist that higher education should explore and further develop race-neutral alternatives to achieve diversity. Race-neutral alternatives to obtain diversity.
He just got done saying that Asian Americans were targeted as part of strategy. That's what made it unconstitutional, you big dope. He's basically saying, that Asian Americans don't count.
Conservative group Students for Fair Admissions was behind both challenges. Now, I want you to look at the data. I'm a college professor.
Yeah, more about that in a future video. You're a college professor at Morris Brown. That college has got a lot of issues, dude. But again, that's neither here nor there for now.
So right after this ruling came out, we had a major administrative meeting. And in this administrative meeting today, we looked at the variables that exist currently and what may exist in the future.
More likely, they had a meeting that you didn't attend, and they emailed you the actual minutes of the meeting, and you read them. I seriously doubt you attended that meeting. But okay. I also seriously doubt that he ever teaches more than one course a year. I don't know.
While it is bad today, it can be worse tomorrow. Let me explain. Right now, the colleges that are absolutely affected by this particular ruling are going to be colleges that have competitive entry. Over 90% of colleges in America for undergrad studies, they do not have true competitive academic allowance, meaning that for the most part, those who apply As long as there's room, you meet the bare minimum requirements, you get in.
Then why are you complaining? If the vast majority of students can get in, why are you so upset about the affirmative action dealio? I'll tell you the reason why. His argument is those whites and Asian Americans, they didn't get into Harvard, but there's these other universities they can go to, so why are they crying? Well, I would turn that around and say, hey, those people who would have gotten in through affirmative action that can no longer get in, well, there's those other colleges that they can go to, so what's the problem?
There may be some level of 099 curriculum required, but you can get into the institution. However, this goes beyond just the institutional dynamic. But look at the hypocrisy of this. How can affirmative action be deemed unconstitutional, but no one has brought up legacy students?
Well, that's very easy. Affirmative action has been deemed unconstitutional. They just proved how they can do it. They just did it, Rashad. And the whole thing about legacy, well, we'll get into that here in a moment.
Students that have provided nothing more than the fact of who their mama and daddy is.
Oh, you mean like Malia Obama? The daughter of President Barack Obama? I wonder where she's going to school. Let's take a look. According to this, following a gap year, during which time she traveled with her friends to South America and with her parents to Indonesia, rough life she's got there, Malia enrolled at Harvard University for the fall 2017 semester. Where did her father go to school? Oh yeah, Harvard. Now, when she got into Harvard, did anybody complain? Did they say, this is legacy, this is unfair? No, they're all behind it.
Oh, that's just fine. Nobody's dealing with that. Let's go beyond universities and colleges. You see, this strikes at the very core of what they've been attempting and successfully doing for a few years. You see, when Trump was running for president the first time, let's go beyond universities and colleges. Have provided nothing more than the fact of who their mama and daddy is. Oh, that's just fine. Nobody's dealing with that. Let's go beyond universities and colleges. You see, this strikes at the very core of what they've been attempting and successfully doing for a few years. You see, when Trump was running for president the first time,
he's got to get Trump in there. I mean, it's amazing, but he just cannot get through a video without Trump.
And he said, make America great again. He was president for 4 years, attempted to execute this particular plan, this particular methodology. He did not have the discipline to do so. But you're seeing exactly what they were referring to now. Florida passing laws, making it basically illegal to be a protester and to be an activist who inconveniences somebody else. If you make white people uncomfortable in Florida, good luck. You may get your business license snatched.
Who in here believes any of that? Really? If you make a white person uncomfortable, you can go to jail. Give me a break, Rashad. I have a feeling that you are not reading the law in Florida correctly, and he's not. That's not what the law says at all.
If you are an educator, you now are restricted on what you can teach as it relates to race.
Well, that's always been true. I mean, if you go and teach certain things about race in a public school, you can absolutely be fired. And that's always been true.
In the United States of America, it goes on and on. When is this going to stop? It doesn't. Until you put the right people in office until you yourself go and run for political office, until we transform the actual policy dynamic by way of the people dynamic. This does not stop.
I don't see him running for political office. Oh, he wants somebody else to do it. Oh, okay.
It only continues. So now this ruling prepares the next one. What is the next one? Outside of the institutional walls. All right.
Wait, you're not going to tell us? Okay.
Your brother, ruling just came out. A lot of people are still trying to fix their minds around the fact that America has gutted affirmative action inside of institutions of higher learning. What say you?
I'm glad you brought up legacy admissions, because that proves for white students, it was never really about merit. And I want to add to that, there's also children who are children of donors, faculty, and staff.
Okay, so I forgot to mention something, so I went back and recorded this a little bit later, and I've inserted it into this video. One of the things that came up here was this whole thing about legacy, the fact that you have legacy admissions. People are getting into these Ivy League schools because their parents were attended those schools, like Malia Obama, for example. You know, yeah, she probably got in because, well, she's the president's daughter. I mean, who really doesn't believe that? But whatever the case, let's not pick on her. So the question now is that why didn't the Supreme Court rule on that? And the answer is very easy. That issue was not before them. The people who basically filed their lawsuit, it was an Asian group that were talking about, who were complaining about the fact that the admissions people, you know, these officers were discriminating against them explicitly. That their issue wasn't with legacy admits. And so they never bothered to file anything about legacy, and therefore, because that issue was not in front of the Supreme Court cannot rule on it. Now you may be wondering, well, why didn't these Asian groups go ahead and target legacy admission? Well, there may be a couple of reasons. One, they may not have any standing in that, and that is they may not be able to prove that they have actually been harmed by that specific practice. And therefore, if you don't have standing, then you can't file a lawsuit. So just because you don't like something doesn't mean you get to sue to have it ended, all right? The other issue could be that while they may have been able to show standing, it might have been very expensive and time consuming to show that they had been damaged by it, and therefore it was not practical for them to do so. So those of you who are out there complaining about legacy admissions, well, file a lawsuit. If you've actually been hurt by this, file a lawsuit, take it to the Supreme Court like these Asian groups did. Or actually, I say groups, but I think there was only one. So you have the power of the courts in your hands. You can do it. But if you don't, you have no right to gripe about it.
Colorblindness was never the law of the land in this country. I guess we're supposed to believe that, I don't know, 45 or 46 presidents, 73% of current Congress, and 97% of the Supreme Court justices we have in this country weren't selected because of their skin color. So we know what race neutrality is, and we know who it's going to benefit. It's going to benefit white people. You don't have to have merit in order for a lot of these institutions in this country to be primarily and majority white. That's what I think moving forward.
Well, actually, he does a better job than Rashad. I mean, he's wrong, but he does a better job of articulating a reasonable argument, at least. Oh, well. I want to now read to you an excerpt from this article in the New Yorker. Okay, and I'll put a link in the article. I'll put a link to the article in the description below. Okay, so it's been going on and on a while. This is way down, and it says here, so where did Asians actually fit into this picture as imagined by the defenders of affirmative action? The word Asian appears only 3 times in Justice Jackson's 29-page dissent. 29 pages, and Asian appears 3 times. Once as a footnote, once as part of a list of median household incomes compared across racial groups, and then again as part of the following statement. A higher percentage of the most academically excellent in-state black candidates were denied admission than similarly qualified white and Asian American applicants. I would like to see the footnote reference for that one. The dissent, which details the lengthy history of discrimination against black people, never mentions the history of racism against Asians in America, whether the lynching of Chinese immigrants in the 19th century, the Chinese Exclusion Act, or Japanese internment. If a society should make decisions with a clear eye toward history, a sentiment I agree with, shouldn't it also follow that a group who was expelled from the U.S. would at least have the right to not be lumped in with the people who kicked them out? Pretty good point. Shouldn't their contemporary claims of discrimination warrant some serious consideration? Justice Sonia Sotomayor's dissent discusses Asian Americans a bit more and acknowledges they also suffer from racism. But her defense of affirmative action goes further in showing how Asians are shortchanged in the undignified competition to join America's multicultural elite. There is no question that the Asian American community continues to struggle against potent and dehumanizing stereotypes in our society, Sotomayor writes. It is precisely because racial discrimination persists in our society, however, that the use of race in college admissions to achieve racially diverse classes is critical to improving cross-racial understanding and breaking down racial stereotypes. So she's saying, okay, so maybe we do discriminate against you, but that's for your own good. You see, the way that we're going to help you is by discriminating against you. I mean, you have got to be kidding me. She's basically saying that, the problem we're having is that there's just too many Asians. And what we need to do is bring down the number of Asians so that they have no choice but to mix with other groups. And in the end, that'll be better for them. I have never seen such a whacked definition or excuse for discrimination in my life. In Sotomayor's telling, Asian Americans who are concerned about being racially stereotyped should attend diverse universities where they can help dispel people's misconceptions by simply existing and getting along with their peers. The author has a slightly different take on it, but yeah, I agree. She then goes on to argue that race-conscious admissions allow Asian American applicants who would be less likely to be admitted without a comprehensive understanding of their background to explain the value of their unique background, heritage, and perspective, and allow colleges to consider the vast differences within that community. In other words, and this is not the author's take, but here's my take on it. We have these Asians that are really good and they're like really high test scores. We got to find a way to eliminate them somehow. Oh, I know. We'll have them tell us their background and their stories, and then we can discriminate them. And then we can discriminate against them, right? We can look at that and say, oh, this Chinese student, he's so dull. He doesn't have any life experiences. His background is too thin. Let's not bring him in. So essentially, she's arguing for putting in a metric that would allow them to basically discriminate against Asian Americans at will. It's not hard to read this as a premise for Asian American teenagers to essentially dance for acceptance or try to distinguish themselves from other Asian Americans by explaining to the good people at the Harvard admissions office why, say, a Vietnamese applicant is more valuable to the Ivy League cultural texture than just another Chinese one. Yeah, that's not what's happening. they're not going to take the Vietnamese or the Chinese student. They're both out. Okay, so enough of that. We have another video here. I'm not even going to show it, but it's the motivational value of failure. Who's going to tell us about the motivational value of failure? Rashad Richey. Oh, Dr. Rashad Richey. No, he does not have a real doctorate. But at any rate, that'll be for next time. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.